In this video, we're going to talk about accessibility for your website. So when we talk about accessibility, we're talking about designing for the diverse set of users who are going to be interacting with your products and your services on the website. So when I say everybody, who is everybody? Everybody includes people who are blind, colorblind, have low vision, and includes people who are deaf or have trouble hearing. Okay, so with hearing difficulties, people with mobility impairments, which may be temporary or permanent, people with cognitive disabilities, people who are young, old, power users, casual users, and those people who just enjoy a quality experience. So it's for everybody. So designing for accessibility means when websites and web tools are properly designed and coded, people with disabilities can use them. When websites, applications, or tools are badly designed, they create barriers that exclude some people from using the web. Accessibility is essential for developers and organizations that want to create high-quality websites and web tools and not to exclude anybody from using their products and services. In fact, web accessibility is required by law in many situations. So it's not just nice to have, but it's a must-have. Web accessibility means that websites, tools, and technologies are designed and developed so that people with disabilities can perceive, understand, navigate, interact with the web. They can contribute to the web. Okay? They can also post information, not just read information, right? Give and take. Web accessibility includes all the disabilities that affect access to the web. So this is a list that is not complete, but it includes the following: auditory, cognitive, neurological, physical, speech, and visual. Okay? So web accessibility also benefits people without disabilities. So people using mobile phones, smartwatches, smart TVs, and other devices with small screens, different input modes, and so on. Older people with changing abilities due to aging. People with temporary disabilities like a broken arm or lost glasses. People in situational limitations such as a bright sunlight or environment that they can't listen to audio. Okay? People using slow internet connection, or people who have limited or very expensive bandwidth. So the web is important and must be accessible to all. The web is an increasingly important resource in many aspects of life. Education, employment, government, commerce, healthcare, recreation, and more. Okay, and in the last couple of years, this has become even more apparent. It's essential that the web must be accessible in order to provide equal access and equal opportunity to people with many different abilities. So access to the information and communications technologies, including the web, is defined actually as a basic human right in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. The accessibility barriers to print, audio, and visual media can be much more easily overcome through web technologies. So accessibility supports the social inclusion for people with disabilities, such as older people, people in rural areas, and people in developing countries. Okay, so web accessibility really depends on several components working together. And these components are web technologies, web browsers, authoring tools, and websites. The W3C initiative develops technical specifications, guidelines, and techniques, and supporting resources that describe the accessibility solutions. Okay, these are considered international standards for web accessibility. So what are the essential components of web accessibility? Well, several components of web development and interaction must work together for web to be accessible. These components are content, okay, and let me highlight that. So content, the information in a web page or web application, including the natural information like text, images, and sounds, and also the code or markup that defines structure and presentation. Okay. Another component is web browsers, media players, assistive technologies such as screen readers, alternative keyboard switches, scanning software, and so on, users' knowledge, experiences, and in some cases adaptive strategies using the web. So developers, designers, coders, authors, etc. So including developers with disabilities and users who contribute content. Okay, so not seeing people, with limited abilities just as the recipients of the web, but also as contributing members of the internet, for the internet. Also offering tools, software that creates websites, and evaluation tools. Web accessibility, evaluation tools, HTML validators, and CSS, and so on. So there's interdependence between components, and components must work together for the web to be accessible. For example, for alternative text on images, we've learned that you have to have alt text and images, right? So how do these all work together? Let's kind of take a look under the hood. Technical specifications address the alt text. For example, HTML defines the alt text attribute, the alt of the image, and the element img. The guidelines define how to implement alt text for accessibility in the different components. Developers then provide the appropriate alt text wording. Authoring tools enable, facilitate, and promote providing alt text on a web page. Evaluation tools are used to help check that the alt text exists. And user agents must provide human and machine interface for the alt text. Assistive technologies like screen readers then provide human interface to the alt text in various modalities. The users get to know how to get this alt text from their assistive technology. Okay, so the implementation. When accessibility features are effectively implemented in one component, the other components are more likely to implement them. So when web browsers, media players, and assistive technologies and other user agents support an accessibility feature, users are more likely to demand it, and developers are more likely to implement it in their content. So when users want to implement an accessibility feature in their content, they're more likely to demand that their authoring tool make this easy to implement. So when authoring tools make a feature easy to implement, then developers are more likely to implement it, right? When an accessibility feature is implemented, then developers and users are more likely to demand that their agents support it. So it kind of all works together in this ecosystem. Okay, so evaluating accessibility. When developing or redesigning a website, evaluate accessibility early and throughout the development process to identify accessibility problems early when it's easier to address them. Don't do it at the very end. So simple steps like changing settings in a browser can help you evaluate some aspects of accessibility. A really thorough evaluation to determine if a website meets all accessibility guidelines takes a bit more effort. But there are evaluation tools that help with evaluation. Okay, so how to design for accessibility. So here's the good stuff and kind of the more practical stuff. The slides before this kind of gives you the background behind accessibility, why it's important. Now we're going to talk about what can we do. So you can provide sufficient contrast between the foreground and the background, making it easy to read. Don't use color alone to convey information. So if something is important, don't just make it in red, make it in red and bold. Ensure that the interactive elements are easy to find. Don't hide interactive elements to make it interesting. Provide clear and consistent navigation options. Make form elements accessible. Provide easily identifiable feedback. Use headings and spacing to group related content. Create designs for different viewport sizes. And include image and media alternatives in your multimedia. Okay. Provide controls for content that starts automatically. All right. So the following slides are going to talk about each of these points. Number one is don't use color as only the visual means of conveying information. This helps users who are unable to or have difficulty with distinguishing one color from another. So quite a few people are colorblind in our society, and we might not be aware of that. So 1 in 12 men or 1 in 200 women are colorblind. Some have low vision, 1 in 30 people, and 1 in 188 people are blind. So make sure that you use color to highlight or complement what is already visible, okay? So here you have a, like a warning sign. So even if somebody can't see the red, they're still able to see the warning sign. Okay, use color to highlight or complement what's already visible. You can put the red triangle icon, the warning sign, in all the error fields. You can use text to indicate and explain why that given field is an error. You can use tooltips, thick borders, bold text, underlines. You can italicize things. The only rule is to use more than color alone. Don't let only the color be the warning. So ensure that there's sufficient contrast between the text and the background. According to WCAG, the contrast ratio between the text and the text background should be at least 4.5 to 1. So if your font is 24 pixels or 19 pixels bold, the minimum drops to 3 to 1. So this guideline helps users with low vision, color blindness, or worsening vision. It helps them see and read the text on your screen. So what does all these numbers that I just mentioned mean? This means that when your text is 24 pixels, 19 pixels bold or larger, the lightest gray color you can use on a white background is this hexadecimal value of gray. For the smallest text, the lightest gray color you can use on a white background is this. Okay, so make sure that your ratio of your contrast is 4.5 to 1. So you want to ensure that the interactive elements are easy to identify. So provide distinct styles for interactive elements such as links and buttons to make them easy to identify. For example, change the appearance of links on a mouse hover. Okay, so when you hover over it, make sure the appearance changes. For mouse hover, keyboard focus, or touchscreen activation. Ensure that styles and naming for the interactive elements are used consistently throughout the website. Some people can't use a mouse and can only use a keyboard to navigate through web pages. We might not have thought about this. So it's really important that users can reach all the interactive elements using the keyboard, and it's clear which element has focus. So they need to know which one they have tabbed to using their keyboard, right? So visible keyboard focus could be a border or a highlight that moves as you tab through the web page, okay? So you have to make sure that you design that in. So provide a clear and consistent navigation options. Ensure that the navigation across the pages within a website has consistent naming, styling, and positioning. Provide more than one method of website navigation, such as, offer them a site search or a sitemap as well. Help users understand where they are on a website or a page by giving orientation cues like a breadcrumb at the top or clear headings. It is important that you make form elements accessible. So the 3 things you need to remember are that you should support keyboard navigation, use a clear visual label, not a placeholder text, and also code a programmatic label for screen readers. So the first point, support keyboard navigation. Make sure that you use semantic HTML form elements. A semantic element identifies its purpose, such as form or button. So non-semantic elements are things like div. The tab key will automatically move between form fields if you code with the semantic HTML elements. Also make sure that you use focus styling. Use strong visual cues on your forms so that the keyboard navigators know which fields are being selected. So here is an example of focus styling. Okay, so on the left, you have focus styling. So when you tab to your message, over here, it's kind of outlined. And the person using this form knows that, he or she has tabbed to this field. On the right-hand side, even though you can see the cursor, it's not very obvious. So use focus styling. The one on the left is better than the one on the right. When the tab key selects a field, it should be surrounded by a box with a contrasting color. So if you're going to have an outline, make sure it's a contrasting color. Don't do yellow on a white background. Okay, so you have a gray here on a white background, which is good. It's a good enough contrast. Now, focus styling doesn't mean that you have to sacrifice on design. You don't have to make it look ugly just because you're trying to emphasize something. You can customize the color of the box to match your brand colors as long as there's still enough contrast. You can also set up different visual cues for mouse navigation. Okay, so use a clear visual label, not a placeholder text. Placeholder text is like this here, right? And it disappears when you click on it. So placeholder text is lightly colored and it's temporary copy in form fields. It introduces some issues for users, even though it's, you know, for a lot of us, it's nice to have and doesn't pose an issue, but it's not accessible for some groups of users. Visually impaired people often have trouble reading it because there's low contrast between the text color and the form field background. It's usually kind of a lighter color, right? And screen readers also often don't detect the placeholder text. This design strains the short-term memory since the text disappears once you click in it. Okay, so if the user has poor short-term memory, then it's not very helpful. So instead of using this, use a clear visual label like this over here above the form field. Okay, so continuing with our previous example, insert phone number on top of the form. Okay, then the use format below it, and then here is the field. Code a programmatic label for screen readers. So labels like this, the label start tag and end tag, are required to make your form accessible to screen reader users. The assistive technology will announce the text between them when it reaches its associated form input field. Okay, label tags also create a clear visual label. Next point, make sure that you provide easily identifiable feedback. So provide feedback for interactions, such as confirming form submission. When somebody has submitted a form, let them know that it's been submitted. Alert the user when something goes wrong. Okay, so if they made an error, let them know that they've made an error. Or notify the user of changes on the page. Instructions should be easy to identify, and important feedback that requires user action should be presented in a prominent style, meaning it should be obvious. Okay, for example, using an error list icon and background color to make errors stand out. Use headings and spacing to group related content. Use white space and proximity to make relationships between the content more apparent. Style headings to group content, reduce clutter, and make it easier to scan and understand. Okay, so in the example, spacing highlights relationship between content. Okay, so the space between content makes it obvious what each group of content is. Next, create designs for different viewport sizes. So consider how page information is presented in different size viewports, right? So we talked about this in responsive design. So different viewports would be for mobile phones or zoomed browser windows or tablets, right? Each of them have a different viewport. So position and presentation of main elements like the header and navigation can be changed to make best use of the space. So ensure that the text size and line width are set to maximize legibility. Make sure that you include image and media alternatives in your design. Provide a place in your design for alternatives for image and media. For example, you might need visible links to transcripts of audio. You might need visible links to audio described versions of videos. Okay, not everybody can watch videos. They might need to read a transcript of a video. Make sure you have text along with the icons and graphical buttons, captions and descriptions for tables or complex graphs. Work with the content authors and developers to provide alternatives for non-text content. Provide controls for content that starts automatically. Provide visible controls to allow users to stop any animations or auto-playing sound. This applies to carousels, image sliders, background sounds, and videos. And that is it for the accessibility PowerPoint. I hope that you have found it useful.